So he grew up he was born in Chicago, but when he was about 8 years old, they got in it was a little bit of rough streets. So he was,
the 30s and
he was in the
40s,
the 40s. Yeah. So he was on Kenmore Street. So the gang on the block was the Kenmore Indians, and so they got in a rumble with some kids on the other block. And when his mom found out, he came home with a shiner or whatever, a black eye or whatever it was. She's like, this is too dangerous. We're going to move to where she grew up, which is Lake Geneva, Wisconsin, which is where I was born. So
how far is that from Monona?
Good question. I'm not sure. It's about 2 hours north of Chicago.
Okay.
So it's southeastern Wisconsin.
Okay.
And so my dad grew up from the age of 8, and that's why he was probably more of a rebel. It was a small town, right? It's a very small town. It's like 4,000, 4,000 or 5,000 people. But his dad passed away when he was like 16. And he joined the Marine Corps at 17, got injured, and got out of the Marine Corps before graduating boot camp. He got a knee injury and was medicaled out. Came back and took a job, but in Chicago actually. But he met my mom there. My mom and dad had known each other in like grade school, and then my mom had moved away, and then she came back as an adult, and they kind of knew each other a little bit in high school. Then my dad left to go to the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Came back like 20, 30 pounds later and, looking a little bit more handsome. My mom noticed him a little bit more. And so then they started dating. They got married at 19, which is crazy.
See?
Got married at 19.
We've been talking about marrying young. I think it's a good thing. Oh.
I don't know. I don't know if it's a good thing or not.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah. It's tough.
It's
tough, and it takes a lot of commitment. And
yes.
And I think this is totally not related to gaming. But if we're in a kind of a culture that's more throwaway, and it's easy to just go to the next thing or whatever, short attention spans, marriage is a lot of work.
Yep.
And when you're young and you're not grown, you have to grow together, and it's easy to grow apart. So I would say...
So they were growing as the kids were growing.
Yeah, they were. And so, of course, because they're young, my mom was pregnant like within the first couple years, so he was in Chicago working, supporting the family, and then they had another kid, and so they had to move.
You're baby number 3?
5.
5. Oh wow.
Yeah, so I'm number 5. So I think by kid number 3, they realized, okay, Chicago's going to be too expensive, so they moved to Lake Geneva, and my dad would ride the train for 2 hours every day to go into Chicago. Now, my dad's hobby, he liked to read military history and stuff. He also liked war games, which kind of became popular in the 60s. So not even popular, but they existed, like Gettysburg and other games like that. So he would play those, and he would also paint miniatures and play Napoleonic war games on sand tables and stuff like that. So that was a super niche nerd thing that wasn't, not very popular. But he did that, and he played diplomacy and other games. And even in the 60s, he was pretty well known as an amateur, game designer.
Yeah.
So he would publish rules variants, and he even had a couple games. He made, I think it's Arbella, or Alexander the Great, which is the Battle of Arbella, if I remember right. So he'd made that for Avalon Hill, and a couple other.
And who would play these games?
It's a good question. I think it was a very small group
community,
of people, very small, and it's probably mostly middle-aged or 30 to 50-year-old white guys, probably conservative white guys. I think. I'm just, I don't have any science to back that up.
Right.
But that's my best guess.
We're just thinking, And
it was a small niche community. So it might be people who were either military historians, maybe they were in the military and learned a little bit about wargaming and then decided they liked it. But it wasn't big. It was not a big market. There was a little bit of commercial success with the game Gettysburg from Avalon Hill, which is a pretty famous board game. But it wasn't, it was niche. And so my dad was working as an insurance underwriter, and he was doing a lot of his corresponding because there was no internet or whatever. So he would write letters and go back and forth and read and play games by mail because he had this 2-hour ride to the train there and back.
So his mind was
So he had a lot of time to do that sort of stuff. He also liked to play games at work. So he would be down in Chicago, and he would invite his friends over, and he would be doing tables and assessing or whatever, and then it would be his turn to do it. So he'd take a move, and then, but his office mate didn't like him doing that. And his office mate's name, the guy whose name was Bruno, and so it came in 1970. They both came up for a promotion, right? There was a promotion. They both competed for it. Bruno
threw him under the bus.
Bruno got the promotion, and guess what? The first thing he did was fired my dad. So it was October.
Thank you, Bruno.
Yeah. Honestly, yeah. It was October of 1970. I was born in November, right?
Yeah.
So my mom's 8 months pregnant, 4 kids.
Yeah.
And my dad has to come home and say, "Hey, honey,
that's bad news.
I got fired." Right. Yeah. And so that wasn't good. So, but he went to my mom and said, "Hey, what do you think? We'll have to move to some other place if I'm going to try and get a job, maybe the East Coast or something, if I want to work in insurance, or I could try my hand at writing." He wanted to maybe write novels or do something like that. And so she said, "Well, you have a little bit of unemployment insurance, so let's see where it goes." Yeah.
So that's a very, I hope wives listening would take notice of what you said. Because I'd like to give a shout out to Ives, Michael's wife, and my wife, Jaja. Because this podcast is the same thing.
Yeah.
It's taking time away from everyone to do what Michael and I like doing.
Yeah.
So for your mom to actually say that to your dad, that's a big thing. Because like pregnant, can you imagine pregnant?
Yeah.
Hormones are up. She could have just said, "What are we going to do? Go find another job, blah, blah, blah."
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Side note.
But no, she didn't. She supported him. She said, "Okay, that's, she's a stay-at-home mom. He was the only breadwinner." And things were pretty tight. We were poor. So my dad, the unemployment insurance ran out before he sold a book, of course, right? Because it's not easy to be an author, right? So his mom, my dad's mom, my grandmother, she'd kind of been bailing him out for a little while. So she was a little frustrated. She said, "Okay, this is it. Like, last straw. The guy who owns the shoe store, he just passed away. His son doesn't want to continue the shoe store, so he's going to sell that. He also did shoe repair. So I'm going to buy the machines, and the guy's going to teach you how to do shoe repair, and then you can do that out of your home and pursue whatever dreams of writing you want, but this is how you can support your family." And so my dad became a shoe repairman, a cobbler.
Wow.
So when I was growing up, my dad worked on shoes in the basement. So I had my little apron and...
Yeah. I would assume you never had brand new shoes.
Yeah. We didn't have brand new anything.
Okay.
Yeah, we were super poor. Like I wore hand-me-down clothes from...
Your brothers?
My sister.
Yours?
Yeah, that's how poor we were. I wore... I wore winter boots.
Okay.
Winter boots, not dresses.
I was going to say, that was a nice skirt.
Yeah. Well, I do have nice legs. But no, it's so like the winter coats or whatever, but it was all hand me down or secondhand or given to us by other people. There was no food except meal times. My mom gardened.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was my cousin Hugh had a garden or had land, and so she had a 1 acre plot that she gardened from and would harvest it and can it for winter time so we'd have something to eat, and then she would bake her own bread and all that stuff because it was less expensive than buying it from the store.
Yes.
So we were all thin back then, so that was a side benefit. But yeah,
180.
Yeah. No, I was like 4 years old.
Okay.
Yeah, so I could.
We'll get there.
Yeah, yeah. I could. I remember I could see all my ribs when I was breathing. I could count every single one of my ribs. That's been a few years since I've counted any of those ribs now, except on my plate when I'm done eating.
Yes.
Sorry. All right. Anyway, we're going far afield, but yeah. So that was kind of the environment going on when my dad, embarked upon creating D&D. So he had this great hobby, right? Not a rich guy, but a fantastic hobby that was a lot of his friend network that he felt satisfied doing, that he got pleasure from doing. So he was a member of the International Federation of Wargamers, which was a nerd group who would do play-by-mail games, and occasionally a few members would get together. But if you had like 4 or 6 people who played war games meet up, that was a big deal. Like, wow, there's that's anything that's more, because usually it's just be like 1 or 2 people and maybe that you would know. And so in 1967,
can you imagine they had families and they would do this?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know. Well, in 1967, my dad invited like 10 people
To your
from
house.
to come to the house. 4 little kids. My mom, I wasn't even there yet, right? And they played games all night, right? And so my mom was like, never again. You cannot do this again. So in 1968, he organized a 1-day convention with the International Federation of Wargamers called, it was in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. They called it the Geneva Convention.
Oh, my God.
Right? The Geneva Convention, which now is called Gen Con, which is 72,000 people. It's the biggest tabletop, North American tabletop.
So your dad started it back
He started Gen Con in 1968.
because Lake Geneva.
Lake Geneva, the Geneva Convention, which is the
my
law of war,
God.
right? And it was the
Yes.
International Federation of Wargamers. So he started that, and like 100 people showed up, which is crazy. 100 people is amazing, right? And so they that was running, and he met a guy named Dave Arneson from that. And so Dave Arneson knew that, and Dave Arneson and my dad collaborated on a game called Don't Give Up the Ship, which is like Napoleonic era sailing ship miniatures game. And I think they also, that was it. And then, so they knew each other and they shared some common interests. And so Dave's like, hey, I'd seen this other game that somebody was doing and I kind of adapted it. And what you can do is you play yourself, right? And you go underground into a dungeon because that limits the choice. It's like, it's nice and compact, it's confined, so they can't just wander off and do whatever. And they go around and explore, and I just kind of set the scene, and then they tell me what's going on. And he's like, okay, that sounds cool. So he's like, and my dad's like, well, maybe I could do something with this rule set I made for miniatures combat called Chainmail that has a fantasy supplement in it and has boiled down the rules. Instead of fighting like formations on formations, you can fight one person fighting one other person, right? So there's rules for that. So it's kind of boiling it down to individual
Some
stuff.
macro.
Yeah, so they brought it down. And so Dave came in like 1972, showed my dad this. It's like a light bulb went off. And then in 1973, he sat down and like wrote, and came up with Dungeons and Dragons. And he's like, this is going to be amazing. And he goes to Avalon Hill, and he's like, this could sell 50,000 copies. And Avalon Hill was like, Gary, we respect you, right? You're a good game designer and stuff, but we make historical war games here. We make serious games. This is like kid stuff. No one's going to buy this. No one's going to be interested. So he's like, what is he going to do? He doesn't have any money, right? So he goes to his friend Don Lowry at Guidon Games, which is just a mom and pop, kind of set up. The guy runs it out of his garage. Nothing like Avalon Hill, right? And Don's like, I just can't take the gamble on this, Gary. I just can't do it. So, sorry. And so my dad didn't know what to do. So his best friend, who play tested it with him and stuff, but was not a game designer, he was a machinist. He, drilled holes in sheets of metal all day long or whatever it was.
A cobbler and a machinist.
Yeah, right. So that's it. So Don Kay took out a loan against like a life insurance policy and came up with like a couple $1,000. And that's how D&D got started. That's how they were able to get the money to make a company and publish the first 1,000 sets of the game Dungeons and Dragons. So if it wasn't for
the Red Book.
Yeah. Well, no, these were kind of.
What was it when it started?
It was like a manila. Well, the box was a wood grain.
Yeah.
Wood grain box. It was like a digest size, and they had like pamphlet or digest size books that just had a little bit of an off yellow cover with very bad pencil sketch drawings, because his art budget was $2.
You still have one of the copies of the original?
I do not. My dad, no, he wanted to sell all those. They go for over $20,000 now.
Wow.
Over $20,000 for one of those. Yeah. But my dad was just like, I just want to sell these so we can eat. So that's it. He just was trying to get rid of them. Yeah. So it's crazy that the art were high schoolers, those who did the art on there. And so literally it was $2. My auntie, Keenan Powell, had just graduated high school. She was 17. And she was doodling at the kitchen table, it's my mom's sister. And my dad's like, hey, you draw pretty well. Do you think you could draw a hippogriff? She's like, yeah, sure. And that's the cover of one of the books. Yeah. Not even, yeah. That's just how it happened. Another kid was like a 15-year-old boy who just had a little bit of art skills, and he liked comic books. And so one of the covers looks suspiciously a lot like a comic book cover from that era, because he probably made it like, oh, I kind of want to look like this, and just drew it. So it was very humble beginnings, right? And the original books kind of supposed that you were a war gamer. And so it would reference things in the chainmail book, which didn't come with the rules. So it was kind of weird. So my dad was very heavily into wargaming, right? So he would probably make references to things that other people might not get. So when
kids wouldn't understand.
Yeah, well, it probably wasn't made for kids necessarily, right? So it's probably made.
Because I remember my packet, I had the book and then I had the modules and the diet, right?
Well, but that's the 80s. So that's like
later.
That's later, right? So what happened is basically you kind of had to have someone show you how to do it, right? So that was the way that it spread. So it spread kind of slowly. So I think it took a full year, maybe 18 months for the first 1,000 to sell. And then they did a second printing, and then the sales just kept like doubling and doubling and doubling. And my dad, well, one of the funny things is we actually paid to get an unlisted phone number, because back in that day you didn't have cell phones, you just had hardwired phones, right? So people would be calling my dad around the clock. Hey, I've got a rules question. And he's like, it's 2:00 in the morning. How are you calling me? Like my 6th level dwarf. He's like, bam, I don't want to hear about your dwarf. It's 2:00 in the morning. What are you doing? Yeah. So we got an unlisted phone number. And then, he was able to, it began to take off, right? And he was able to stop being a cobbler and to become a game designer full time. And, they hired their first employees, and it was pretty neat.
Visit AbbottEServices.com for fast medical transcription service. This podcast episode is brought to you by AB Music Creative.